I didn't expect a celebration, but I thought he might remember. I made coffee the way I always do, dark, unflavored, left to go cold. The mug had a hairline crack near the rim, barely visible, but I always set my lips just below it. That kind of small precision used to make Reed smile. "You're predictable in the most boring ways," he once said, dry as dust. I don't think it was meant to hurt. It still did. The house was silent, save for the dull thud of the porch swing brushing the siding. I didn't sit there this morning. The weather wasn't bad. I just didn't want to watch the street. The knock came while I was rinsing a plate. Not the tap-tap of delivery drivers or the rhythm neighbors use when they need sugar or gossip. Just one knock. Deliberate. No one waited. There was a package on the mat. Brown paper corners tucked tightly, a pale blue ribbon circling it once like a held breath. The handwriting stopped me mid-bend. Reed never looped his letters. Even as a boy, he printed in straight architectural lines, all uppercase, neat as rail ties. I hadn't seen it in years, but I recognized it without needing to read. I carried it inside without tearing the paper, set it gently on the kitchen table, and stared at it, hands dry and trembling. Not fear, more like memory reaching backward. Eventually, I untied the ribbon. Inside a white box, and within that, a dozen cookies, maybe more. Each one hand-decorated like something from a magazine. Sugar-dusted stars, iced leaves in gold-blue petals, edged with shimmer. Not store-bought. Not anything he ever knew how to make. There was a card taped to the lid. "Happy birthday, Mom." Let's start over. No signature. None needed. I stood at the sink for a long time afterward, dishwater cooling. The house held still like it was waiting to see what I would do. I wrapped one cookie in plastic, tucked it into a container, and set it in the fridge. Not because I wanted to eat it, because something about throwing them away felt premature. The rest I rewrapped in the same careful paper. Martha lived 10 minutes away. Reed's mother-in-law. She'd always been kind in that distant, dignified way older women sometimes are to each other. No warmth, no cruelty. Just small gestures, a tin of tea, a gentle word at family gatherings when Julia grew sharp, when Reed grew silent. I didn't say much when I handed her the box. "Thought you'd like these." She tried to decline. I insisted. Neither of us asked who made them. That night I sat in the dark dining room and looked at the empty table. The blue ribbon sat coiled near the edge where a candle used to be. I hadn't lit that candle in 3 years. The phone rang the next morning just as I was pouring my second cup. I stared at the screen. His name looked unfamiliar against the light. "Hello, hi, Mom." Light, almost casual. "Happy birthday." There was a pause. I heard the faint clatter of a spoon on porcelain, or maybe I imagined it. "I got your package. I wasn't sure you would." "I did. It was..." I hesitated, unexpected. Another pause. Then more gently. "So, how were they?" The cookies I didn't move. I didn't eat them. A longer silence. I gave them to Martha. The air thickened. "You gave them to Martha. She's always liked sweets." His voice didn't change immediately. Just the temperature of it. A soft chill. "They weren't for her. I didn't..." "They were for you." His tone clipped. "Only you." Then nothing. The line went dead. I sat back. The mug in my hand had left a ring on the table I didn't see until then. I stared at it as if it had meaning. Maybe it did. A few hours later, Julia's name lit up my phone. Her voice came fast, brittle. "It's Martha." "She collapsed this morning, vomiting, disoriented. They think it's a reaction to something she ate." I didn't move. "She mentioned you brought cookies." "I did. She said they were beautiful." "They were." They're running tests now. Can you think of anything unusual? I looked toward the fridge but didn't open it. No, I said. If you remember anything, I'll call. When the call ended, I stood there still holding the phone as if the silence on the other end had shape. I opened the fridge. The cookie sat untouched in its box, the plastic warped slightly from the cold. I didn't touch it. That evening, while taking out the trash, I saw the bottle. Small clear tucked near the bottom under coffee grounds. No label, just a faint film of powder along the inside. It wasn't mine. I picked it up, turned it in my hand. The lid was tight, clean, unfamiliar. Back in the kitchen, I placed it next to the cookie on the counter. Side by side. A gift and a question. I didn't cry. I didn't even sit. Later that night, I stood in the hallway, phone in hand, ready to dial a number I hadn't used in years. Then I turned off the light slowly and walked back to the bedroom, the ribbons still resting on the dining table like a forgotten promise. Some silences aren't about absence. Some are answers. I never expected to be the center of anything. I only ever hoped to be welcome on the edge. After Charles died, I told myself not to call too often. Once a week was enough. I would count the days and make a list of things to say, so I wouldn't repeat myself or sound too lonely. I kept the calls brief, left space for his voice, which grew shorter each time. When Reed brought Julia home for the first time, I vacuumed twice. I ironed the tablecloth I hadn't used since the memorial, even though I knew we were ordering takeout. She wore a cream turtleneck and didn't take off her shoes. That first dinner, I remember her glancing at the bookshelf behind me. These kinds of houses, she said, always smell like old books. I smiled, then tried to joke about how I'd stopped buying candles because they all just smell like dust anyway. Neither of them laughed. The silence that followed felt like a room I was not allowed to enter. I started leaving earlier after every visit. First, it was because they had plans, then because the baby needs her nap schedule, and eventually I stopped needing a reason. I would kiss my granddaughter on the head, lift my coat from the same hook, and leave while they were still rinsing dishes. One Thanksgiving, I brought pumpkin bread in a tin with a paper ribbon. Julia opened it, looked inside, and placed it beside the untouched cranberry sauce. No one mentioned it. I watched it remain sealed the whole afternoon. The next week, I found the tin at a secondhand shop downtown. Still had the sticker on the bottom that read, "To Julia from Mom." I didn't ask. I just bought it back for $1. Reed always liked roasted potatoes with rosemary. I used to make them every time he came over, even if it was just for coffee. At some point, he started pushing them around the plate. I'm trying to cut down on carbs. The next time, I didn't make them. He didn't notice. When Julia had their first child, I knitted a blanket in muted greens and soft blues colors I thought would feel peaceful. At the baby shower, her mother handed over a mass of pastel pinks and frills. Julia clutched it like a crown. Mine stayed folded on the gift table. I took it home that night and laid it across the back of the couch. It's still there, unused, but not forgotten. On Christmas morning 2 years ago, I left a bag of gifts on their porch. Small things, a puzzle Reed loved as a child repackaged, a scarf for Julia hand-stitched, a set of animal flashcards for the baby. Later that day, I received a message, a single heart emoji. No words. No one called. When the invitation came for the preschool graduation, it was addressed to the Dalton family. I showed up early and found a seat near the middle. After the ceremony, I stood in the hallway waiting with a small bouquet. Reed walked by holding Julia's hand. "Why are you standing there?" There wasn't a seat with my name. There were plenty of open spots. I didn't want to take someone else's. He didn't look at me. "You overthink everything. It's not always about you." At home, I placed the bouquet in the kitchen sink. The flowers never opened. They withered inward. I once offered to help with childcare when their sitter canceled last minute. I cleared my entire week, reorganized appointments. When I called to confirm, Reed paused. Julia found someone else. We just thought it's easier that way. He didn't explain what that way meant. I kept a drawer in the hallway with little toys and books for when the baby came over. It's still full. A wooden rattle unopened. A stack of cloth picture books with teeth marks from no one. They smell faintly of lavender sachets I tucked in last spring. Reed used to lean his head on my shoulder when he was tired, back when he was still small enough to fall asleep in the car. I remember once after a school recital, he sat beside me in the back seat fiddling with the buttons on my sleeve. "Don't say anything," he whispered. "I don't want Dad to know I messed up the words." I didn't. Not then, not ever. Years later, during a dinner where I tried to bring up that story, he frowned. That never happened. I looked at the sleeve of my blouse, the button still loose after all this time. I stopped mentioning memories after that. At one family gathering Julia's birthday, I think Reed pulled me aside while I was slicing a cake. "Try not to make things about you tonight, okay?" I nodded and set the knife down. The frosting stuck to my knuckles like guilt. I once wore a brooch his father gave me, a small gold locket with our initials engraved. At brunch, Julia commented on it while buttering a scone. Vintage pieces like that don't really go with modern outfits. I unclipped it later in the restroom and dropped it into my purse. There was never one moment when the door shut, just small clicks of disconnection, like turning the volume down until I couldn't hear myself in the room anymore. It's strange how much energy I spent trying to be convenient. Soft edges, no needs. A pleasant presence muted like background piano, and still the invitation never came. Not really. I once thought love was something that could be earned by staying out of the way. I don't think that anymore. I've learned that absence isn't always silent. Sometimes it hums at the edges of a room. The apple pie sat untouched. I had wrapped it in wax paper and tied it with twine. I still remember the way the knot sat crooked in the center, like something trying to be neat but falling short. I had placed it on the dessert table next to the carrot cake and store-bought macarons. Julia's 35th birthday. Reed's voice was louder than usual that night, buoyant in a way I didn't recognize. I was seated at a folding table near the laundry door with a stack of winter coats piled beside me. At one point, someone asked if I was waiting for an Uber. I said nothing. The pie remained sealed until the end of the evening when Julia offered guests leftover pastries and passed over mine as if it had been forgotten behind the microwave. The next morning, the pie was back in my car. I hadn't placed it there. It rested on the backseat ribbon still intact. I didn't bring it inside. The thank you card arrived 2 weeks after their wedding. A white envelope, elegant script. I opened it carefully, thinking of the toast I gave the silver frame I'd wrapped in linen, the pressed hydrangea from my garden I'd tucked inside Julia's bouquet as a gesture of goodwill. The card read, "To Mom and Dad, thank you for raising me with grace and strength. To my dearest friends, thank you for standing by me. To everyone who made the day beautiful, I'm grateful." I turned it over, hoping there might be a note on the back. There wasn't. There's a photograph in their hallway, taken professionally, framed in matte gold. Reed, Julia, and their daughter stand in front of a grove of pine trees, wearing matching cream sweaters. Their smiles are perfectly timed. I remember the day of that shoot. I'd offered to babysit so they could get ready without rush. Julia replied with a voice clipped like scissors. "We've got it handled. That photo has hung there for 3 years. I have never been in any of them." When Reed appeared on the local news after winning that research grant, I watched the segment alone in my kitchen bowl of cereal, going soggy on the counter. They interviewed him next to a wall of books. The interviewer asked who had shaped his work ethic. He didn't hesitate. "My wife," he said. She taught me discipline and compassion. She's my daily reason." He smiled, not to the camera, but towards something off-screen. In the winter after that interview, I noticed their daughter wasn't wearing the hat I'd knitted. Pale green wool, two soft pom-poms, buttons on the ear flaps shaped like tiny stars. I'd given it to her wrapped in brown paper with a note, "For mornings too cold for words." Julia thanked me via text. Cute. That was all. Months later, I saw the hat in the bottom drawer of the hall cabinet, still folded. There was a tag on another hat above it, price sticker. Half peeled. That one had glitter. There was once a coat. I wore it every Christmas, deep burgundy, slightly faded along the cuffs. It was Charles's favorite. After he passed, I kept wearing it. One December, Julia looked me over as I arrived. "That coat again," she murmured. "You really don't like to switch things up, do you?" I remember reaching for the lapel later that evening, brushing off nothing, as if smoothing myself into a version that wouldn't provoke comment. At the holiday dinner the year Reed was promoted, I brought a casserole in the dish his grandmother gave me. He used to call it the green dish asked for it every time we had company. That night, Julia placed it in the far corner of the buffet next to the napkins. "I thought we'd stick with the caterer's menu this time," she said. "Just for consistency." I took the dish home, untouched. It still had condensation on the lid when I put it back in the cabinet. I haven't used it since. There was once a voicemail from Reed left by mistake. I never told him I heard it. Just a click, then his voice. "She'll get over it. She always does." I replayed it twice, not for content, but for tone. He sounded tired. Or maybe just finished. The chair at their table that used to be mine now stays pulled in always, with a throw draped over it. Decorative, Julia calls it. I brought her that throw years ago, thinking it would match their couch. She uses it now to fill space where I no longer sit. One summer, I sent a postcard from a trip I took alone. A garden in Maine. I'd written, "The lupines here remind me of your first science fair project." No reply. Months later, I saw it pinned to the inside of their pantry door, half covered by a grocery list. There are no photos of me in their living room, no magnets from places I visited, no mugs I once gifted. Reed used to keep a paperweight I gave him, a glass dome with flecks of copper on his desk. I noticed last year that it had been replaced by a metal globe. When I picked it up, the desk drawer slid open slightly. Inside was the paperweight wrapped in a cloth napkin. None of it stings sharply. Not anymore. It's more like holding your breath for so long that even when you exhale, the lungs don't quite believe they're safe. I still keep the scarf I wore to their wedding. Pale gray, embroidered with ivy. I thought it was elegant. Julia called it quaint, then added, "Maybe next time something a bit less textured." I folded it neatly that night and tucked it into my purse. It's never been worn again, but I refuse to let it go. I think forgetting is louder than remembering. It has a shape. A room you're erased from but still walk through in your mind. I always thought the worst things would come with noise. I noticed the bottle when I was tying the trash bag. It had settled at the bottom, nestled between a paper towel roll and the box. Reed's package came in. Clear plastic, palm-sized, no label. A faint dusting of white powder clung to the inside like something forgotten, or worse, remembered. I lifted it carefully. The cap was still on. Nothing about it was remarkable except that I had never seen it before. I set it on the counter beside the mail and stood there, not touching it again. There was no rush of blood, no sudden dread, just a stillness that crept into the kitchen like an overdue visitor. The refrigerator hummed behind me. I opened it. The last cookie was still there, resting in its sealed container. The icing had dulled slightly, but the shape remained perfect. Deliberate? Careful, they zacked. I closed the fridge and looked down at my hands. They didn't shake. Not yet. At some point that afternoon, I cleaned the sink with more force than necessary. I rearranged the dish towels. I scrubbed the coffee ring from the table twice, even though it had already faded. The bottle remained in the corner of the counter silent, watching. Later, when I sat down, I placed the bottle in front of me and stared at it the way I used to stare at Reed's school projects, trying to understand the logic, the order. There had to be one. His words echoed back like dust off an old book spine. They weren't for her. Only you. Not loud, not angry, just surgical. I dialed Eliza's number without thinking. She picked up after one ring. I need a favor. Quietly. Don't ask. She didn't. I hung up and let the phone rest on the table beside the bottle, beside the past. Years ago, I bought a small, fireproof box. I used to keep Charles's will in it, along with the deed to the house and a photograph of Reed as a newborn swaddled in yellow. Now it held nothing. I had meant to refill it someday. I looked over at the envelope from Reed's package, the one I hadn't thrown out. His handwriting still stared back at me from the torn flap. Clean, straight lines. No curve wasted. I'd seen that same economy in him as a child. Folding his socks into perfect thirds. Organizing crayons by tone, not color. He once corrected a waitress for writing our name with 2 E's instead of 1. It matters, he told me. Names matter. The bottle had no name. I thought of Martha. I thought of the way she once handed me a tin of chamomile tea after Julia's second baby was born. You don't have to stay long, she had whispered, without malice. I hadn't. I wondered how she looked now, hooked to IV lines, maybe half-conscious, maybe whispering about cookies that glittered too much. Julia's voice still rang in my ears from the day before. She mentioned they were beautiful. That word, not delicious, not thoughtful, beautiful. I stared at the plastic bottle. My thumb traced the edge of the cap, not to open it, just to feel where it ended. There was a silence in me then that didn't feel like peace, more like a cold room that someone else had emptied. At dinner once, not long after Reed had started his new job, he leaned across the table and looked at me with a voice so flat it felt carved. Not everything needs your interpretation, Mom. I hadn't spoken for the rest of the meal. That was years ago. But my mouth still remembers the taste of withheld words. I once found a note tucked in Reed's textbook when he was 12. It said, "Let things be quiet. You'll always be the one who notices." I never asked where it came from. He had looked at me too sharply when I tried. Now, years later, I found myself doing exactly that, letting things be quiet, noticing too much. I folded a napkin, placed it under the bottle, like it needed gentleness. The cookie remained in the fridge. I didn't unwrap it, but I couldn't look away from the thought of what it carried. The list in my mind began to take form, the symptoms, the silence, the unopened dessert, the unnaturally still bottle. One time at a family brunch, Julia had reached over my shoulder and whispered, "You don't always need to bring something you know. It's starting to look performative." I had nodded, though I couldn't tell if she meant the casserole or the knitted socks I had tucked in the gift bag. I never brought food again. I wondered now if silence had been the real offense, if stillness itself had been read as control. I once told Eliza, half joking, that being forgotten gracefully was a skill no one teaches. She'd poured me wine and said, maybe because it shouldn't be. She had a way of making things sound final without closing the door. The bottle on the table did not move. Neither did I. There was no announcement, no thunderclap, no revelation, only a single truth sitting next to me like an old acquaintance, someone I loved may have wished me gone. Not metaphorically, not in passing. And I may have passed that intention to someone else wrapped in ribbon, calling it kindness. There are things I can't unknow now, not even by pretending I misread them. I looked at the bottle. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the fridge. And then I looked away. Some things unravel without ever coming apart. I didn't block their numbers. I just stopped answering. I didn't unfollow them out of anger. I just grew tired of the waiting, the pause, after every post, every caption, hoping for my name and not finding it. I deleted no photos, but I took down the one in the hallway, the frame with the glossy shot of the four of us taken the day Reed moved into his first apartment. Julia's hand on his chest, my hand already half out of frame. I dusted the table where it had stood. The square of wood beneath it was darker than the rest. Years of sunlight had gone around me. I didn't cry when I packed the empty cookie box into a canvas tote, or when I slipped the bottle in beside it. I added the notebook last. A black spiral-bound one Reed had left in the basement years ago. It still smelled faintly of paper and penciled graphite. His handwriting was the same even then. Block letters. Margins tight. One page read, "Control is earned when emotion is eliminated." Another precision isn't cruelty, it's protection. The pages didn't shake as I turned them. My hands had grown used to this kind of weight. At the police station, I waited 10 minutes before they brought me to a room that smelled faintly of printer ink and old carpet. The walls were bare except for a calendar flipped to the wrong month. Detective Shaw looked younger than I expected, a tie too neat for the time of day, a notepad already open. He gestured toward the seat opposite his. I nodded and sat. No clipboard, no statement form. Just a conversation between a woman and a man who had probably heard too many truths in too many voices. He asked when the package arrived. I answered. He asked if I ate the cookies. I told him I hadn't. He paused. What made you hesitate? I glanced at the tote bag beside me. He never baked before. He nodded like that made sense. He asked how Martha came to receive the rest. She was kind to me when she didn't have to be. He made a note slowly. Then he looked up. Do you believe your son intended to harm you? I looked down at the table. The edge was worn chipped, just enough to catch a thread. I don't know what he meant, I said. But I think I'm no longer part of his idea of family. He tapped the pen once against the pad. Why do you say that I didn't answer right away? Instead, I opened the tote and laid the items on the table. The bottle. The box. The notebook. Each one like a quiet sentence. When he leaned forward, his voice softened. This is going to go in a report. But I want to be clear. There's no rush. You can stop whenever you want. I didn't. He asked if Reed had ever been violent. No, I said. Controlling, yes. Manipulative, quietly. Did he have financial reason to wish me gone? I thought of the will I'd changed last year, the one that redirected everything to an education grant under my maiden name. He doesn't know that part. The detective nodded slowly. People don't always need a reason that makes sense to others. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't answer. I only asked for a copy of the toxicology results when they became available. On my way out, I passed a hallway lined with closed doors. One of them had a nameplate that had been scraped clean but never replaced. Outside, the wind pressed against my coat. I buttoned it all the way up. At home, I took the mug Reed had made in elementary school off the shelf and set it in the donation box. The glaze had always been too thick. The handle never sat straight. Still, I'd kept it. Until now. The kitchen felt larger without it. I spent the rest of the day folding small things. Towels, dishcloths, the corners of a letter I never intended to send. I opened my drawer and placed the notebook from the station inside, pressing it flat beneath a stack of old tax papers. Later, I received a message. "Hey, Mom, haven't heard from you. You okay?" No punctuation, no context. I didn't answer. The next morning, another message. "We should talk." I stared at the screen for a long time, then placed the phone face down on the counter. That evening, I sat at the table and reread the line from the notebook. Control is earned when emotion is eliminated. The words were printed with care, no hesitation, just structure. I looked up and let the silence settle around me like old linen. I once asked Reed why he never joined after-school clubs. "They're loud," he said, "and pointless." I didn't press him. I just made sure to leave the porch light on later than usual. I no longer leave the porch light on. The detective had asked me if I believed my son wanted to hurt me. I hadn't said yes, but I didn't say no either. What I said was this: I don't think he sees me as his mother anymore. He hadn't written anything after that. Just closed the folder. I closed the notebook in my drawer, one hand resting on the edge for a moment longer than necessary. I don't need to tell anyone what I know. Some exits aren't marked by doors. Some are only a folding and a turning away. I folded quietly, and I left. I used to measure my worth in usefulness. Now I measure it in silence. The apartment has 3 windows, each facing the brick wall of another building. Afternoon light sneaks through the blinds in fractured lines, landing on the floor, in slats that shift across the hours. I watch the light move more than I watch the clock. The kettle on the stove is old-fashioned, with a chipped enamel handle, and a whistle I rarely let reach full sound. I heat water the way I used to when Charles had migraines, slowly without urgency. I don't use sugar anymore, just the tea and a slice of lemon thin enough to see the seeds through the pulp. The first night here, I heard a knock from the pipes under the sink and sat up straight, expecting something else. I waited, still not breathing. Then came the second sound: steam whistling from the kettle forgotten on the stove. I turned off the burner and stood in the kitchen a long while, holding the edge of the counter as if it might tell me something true. There are 2 chairs at the table, but I only use one. I place the other against the wall, draped a shawl over its back. It looks occupied, which somehow makes the room less so. At the library, I shelve paperbacks in the children's section. There's a warmth there that doesn't demand anything of me. A boy once mistook me for his grandmother. He reached for my hand and called me Nana before his mother corrected him. "She's not your grandma, baby. She's just helping out." I smiled and handed him a book about dinosaurs. I didn't tell her he was right in a way she didn't mean. The other volunteers speak softly. No one pries. The supervisor asked once if I'd like more hours. I declined. I've learned to leave space between things now. I brought one picture with me when I moved. It's not of Reed. It's of a tree I once stood beneath in Vermont. The leaves had turned almost silver that year, catching morning light like mirrors. I remember the air that day more than the trip itself. I hung it above the sink. When I do dishes, it reminds me that beauty can live where no one watches. I don't talk about Reed. Not to neighbors, not to the man who fixed the heater, not even to Eliza when she stops by with groceries I didn't ask for. She knows not to ask. We talk about crossword puzzles and the new woman at the dry cleaner who overstarches everything. Once during tea, she looked around the room and said, "You never did like clutter." I traced the rim of my cup and replied, "There's less to trip over when you travel light." She didn't answer. I keep a small notebook in the drawer beside my bed. Not a journal, just a place for reminders. I write down things I want to remember on days when I forget I'm not waiting for someone. Pick up more lemons. Schedule eye exam. Read pages 112, 145. Breathe at 3:00. The page from yesterday has a faint ring on it where my teacup rested too long. I didn't blot it. Some stains deserve their place. I walk every morning to the post office even when I have nothing to mail. It's not about the letters. It's about movement, about choosing where my feet land instead of letting them follow someone else's steps. I pass a shop window that sells children's shoes. One day, I noticed a pair of blue sneakers that looked like the ones Reed wore in second grade. Velcro straps, rubber toes. He hated them, called them baby shoes, but they made him run faster than he ever had in his life. He didn't know I watched from the bleachers. I don't stop in front of that window. I glance, then walk on. It's enough to see without needing to hold. There's a woman 2 doors down who leaves out birdseed each morning. The pigeons come first, then the cardinals. She told me once that if you feed them enough days in a row, they remember your hands. I haven't tested it, but I believe her. I've begun folding my prescriptions into a single list. I updated my insurance and set the documents in a folder labeled Francis Only. I don't plan to leave a mess behind even if I no longer know who will clean it up. The bakery on 5th sells day-old bread for half price. I bought a loaf last week, sliced it thin, and toasted it until the edges curled. I ate it with butter and read the same paragraph in a gardening book 5 times before realizing it wasn't about gardens at all. Sometimes I open the cupboard and count the teacups. There are 4. I only use one, but I keep the others lined up as if expecting visitors who never arrive. Julia once told me, "You make people feel like they have to be careful." She was wearing earrings shaped like raindrops and didn't look up when she said it. I remember wondering what it meant to be careful around someone like me. Someone who tried so hard not to be noticed. The windows here don't open all the way. There's a safety latch built in. I rest my palms on the glass in the mornings just to feel the temperature. Cold doesn't bother me the way it used to. It's predictable, honest. I haven't opened the envelope from the detective. It's in the drawer beneath the notebook. Sealed. Not because I don't care, but because I no longer need to know everything. Some things are allowed to remain unanswered, the way a melody trails off at the end of a song without repeating the refrain. Last night I boiled water for tea and turned the lights low. I sat on the balcony with a shawl over my shoulders and listened to the hum of distant traffic, the kind that doesn't belong to anyone. The cup in my hand grew cool before I finished. And still, I stayed. I stopped looking at the digital clock after it turned past 9. The tea had long gone cold on the table. I hadn't meant to let it sit, but I hadn't meant to drink it either. Julia's message had arrived earlier that afternoon. "Hope you're well. Reed's been worried. We're going through a bit of a rough patch. Hope you can come for dinner on Sunday." The punctuation was careful. The phrasing was polished. No warmth, no apology. I stared at the screen for a while, then locked it. I didn't answer. I stood, rinsed out the mug, and returned it to the rack without drying it. The lamp near the window still gave off its faint buzz when I unplugged it. I folded the throw blanket in quarters and left it at the corner of the couch, the way my mother used to fold hospital gowns, neatly, impersonally, with no expectation of reuse. Later that evening, I received a call from the attorney who had helped with Richard's estate. I already knew what he would say. "Your son's asking about the deed," he said. Specifically, the title transfer clause. I told him the trust had already been assigned, that the property now belonged to the Cultural Heritage Foundation, that the transfer had gone through 6 weeks ago quietly, permanently. He was silent for a moment. I let the silence hold. There was nothing to explain. When I first signed the house over the woman at the foundation, Claire wore a brooch shaped like a pine cone. She had passed me the papers and paused. "Are you sure this isn't sentimental for your family?" she asked. I traced the edge of the signature line slowly, then nodded. "It used to be. It's not anymore." That was the only sentence I said that day. A second message came through around 11. "Reed thinks you're upset." But this is when family should come together the most. I reread it once, then again. Then I powered the phone off. I reached for the green cardigan I'd patched last winter, the one with the shoulder seam that never sat quite right. I used to keep it in the guest closet at Reed's house for chilly nights. It still carried the faint scent of rosemary. There was a grocery list folded into the sleeve: milk, pasta, graham crackers, baby shampoo. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my expired passport. Sometimes I wonder if they remembered how I used to keep a toothbrush at their house. Not because I expected to stay, but because I wanted to show I was prepared in case I was ever asked. I never was. There had been a dinner once years ago when Julia set a place for Grandma Lois, but none for me. When I arrived, Reed looked up startled. "Oh, you didn't tell me you were coming." I spent the evening seated on the edge of the couch, balancing a paper plate on my lap. No one offered a chair. Later, Julia handed me a foil-wrapped container and murmured, "Sorry, we just didn't have room at the table tonight." "You understand," I had nodded. That phrase, "you understand," echoed in my head for months. Not as comfort, as a dismissal. The morning after the messages, I brewed a fresh cup of tea. This time I drank it slowly. A boy from the neighboring unit came to my door selling wrapping paper for a school fundraiser. He handed me the catalog without looking up, then paused. "Are you someone's grandma?" I smiled. "Not today." He laughed, nodded, and walked off. I left the catalog unopened. On the shelf above the kettle, there's a small glass jar with no label. I used to keep sugar in it. Now it holds buttons, green ones mostly. The kind I used to sew onto Reed's coats when he was a boy. One still has a thread dangling from the center, dark and frayed like an old root. I touched it lightly, then closed the lid. At the library later that week, a woman asked if I had children. I told her I once knew someone who called me Mom. She laughed like it was a joke. I didn't correct her. The town newspaper ran a small feature on the Cultural Foundation's newest historical properties. There was a photo of the house looking cleaner than I remembered. The caption read, "Donated anonymously by a local resident." I clipped it out and placed it inside the back of my recipe binder behind the page for baked oatmeal. That night I sat by the porch as a moth beat softly against the glass. Drawn to the lamp, I turned the light off. Inside the quiet, everything had sharper edges, the kind I no longer feared, and I was done pretending that I didn't see them. I no longer wake with the dread of unread messages or the silence that follows them. I keep a kettle on the counter now. Matte steel a little scratched, but it hums faithfully every morning. I no longer wonder if someone else will need the hot water first, or if I should wait my turn. There is no turn. Only time moving quietly in my direction for once. The postman knows my name now. He calls out when something arrives from the university. The continuing education catalog. They send seasonally, though I've never signed up. I circle courses in pencil, not as a promise, just to acknowledge possibility. At the library, I sit in the reading corner on Saturdays. The children arrive in coats too big, fingers sticky from whatever their parents bribed them with. I read softly, holding the book open with both hands. When they laugh at a misbehaving bear or gasp at a hidden key, I let the sound settle around me like music I didn't know I missed. No one tells me I'm doing it wrong. No one asks why I'm there. Once a boy asked if I was someone's grandma. I shook my head, but he had already moved on. I liked that. Not the question, not the confusion, but the way it didn't matter either way. I bought a cardigan in a warm plum color. I wear it without checking if it matches anyone else's taste. There was a moment about 2 weeks ago when I saw Reed across the library's main floor. He stood near the biographies holding a book too loosely, like he wasn't really looking. I watched him notice me. His posture changed first, like he remembered something suddenly, something weighty. Then he turned his back. I didn't move. He didn't come closer. I didn't call out. No one said anything. A week later, I filed the paperwork. Just initials at the bottom of a form, but it felt larger. I restored my birth name, my mother's name, Evelyn Hargrave. I hadn't written it in decades. The H looked unfamiliar in my handwriting rounder, as if it had waited all this time without judgment. I didn't tell anyone. There was no announcement, no folded card in the mail, no need. At the grocery store, I signed the receipt with my new old name. The cashier doesn't blink. That is what I want: ordinary recognition. No questions, no ties. Julia sent a letter, handwritten, 2 pages. She used to type always. The ink was blue, the lines careful. She wrote, "We all say things in anger we regret. Family is still family. Reed misses you more than he can say." There was no apology, only suggestion. I folded the letter neatly and placed it behind a stack of gardening magazines I haven't opened. I think often about the silence between people. Not just the silence that follows a fight, but the kind that sits in rooms, fills holidays, layers itself over birthdays like dust. I used to try and sweep it away. Now I let it settle where it must. I rearranged the apartment last Sunday, moved the armchair to face the window, even if it means a draft on cold mornings. I like the view better that way. There's a tree across the street that drops purple blossoms in spring. They stain the sidewalk. I want to watch them fall this year. At the clinic, the nurse asked if anyone else needed to be listed for emergencies. I said no. When she looked up, I added, "I'll be all right." There's a relief in knowing you can make decisions without explaining them. I keep the old family photos in a box now. Not hidden, just not displayed. A boundary, not a burial. Some evenings I brew chamomile tea and open the windows. Not to air out sorrow, just because I like the scent of outside coming in. A girl at the library gave me a drawing last week, crayon loops and starbursts labeled Miss Evelyn. I pinned it near the kitchen light switch. That's the name they know me by now, not Mom, not Mrs. Dalton, just Evelyn. That's enough. Reed once told me, "You're too sensitive. You take everything personally." He said it after I noticed Julia hadn't invited me to the school recital. I hadn't raised my voice. I'd only asked. I think about that now and wonder if perhaps I wasn't too sensitive, but just tuned to a different frequency, one they refused to hear. At the bank, I set up my own account separate from anything joint or co-owned. No beneficiaries. No just in case. The woman helping me smiled and said, "Starting fresh." I nodded. It was easier than explaining. Some days I write down things I want to try: volunteer work, local walking groups, a recipe for cinnamon bread I used to make when Reed was little. I haven't baked it yet, but I will. And when I do, I won't package it in a tin or drop it at anyone's doorstep. I'll eat a slice with tea right here, alone, not lonely. They might think I'm punishing them, that I'm holding a grudge. But this isn't about them anymore. It's not about withholding forgiveness. It's about giving myself space that isn't shaped by someone else's needs. There is no confrontation, no letters returned, no angry voicemails, just distance. Deliberate and clean. I don't need them to understand. I only need this quiet and the dignity of not asking for what they never truly offered. The old photo of Reed as a baby still sits in the drawer. I don't look at it often, but I haven't thrown it away. It belongs to a time that did exist, a version of me that existed. I'm not erasing her. I'm simply not living her life anymore. Some decisions arrive quietly, not as choices, but as a final exhale. I printed the letter in the back room of the library just before closing. The hum of the machine was the only sound, like a soft breath held too long. I folded the page slowly, once across, then again. The paper felt heavier than it should have. On the table beside it, the birthday card lay face down, the same one I'd found months ago, with the ribbon still faintly creased. I didn't reread it. I knew every word by where the ink had pressed harder. I placed both inside the envelope, sealed it, and pressed the flap until it warmed under my palm. There was no need to address it in my handwriting. The clerk at the front desk helped with the certified mail form. I watched her hands move efficiently over the fields, her voice friendly, unknowing. She smiled when she handed me the receipt. I tucked it into my wallet without speaking. At home, the old key was still in the lining of my winter coat. I had stitched a small pocket there years ago, thinking it would be safer than a keychain. The stitching had loosened over time. I held the key between my fingers and then dropped it into the wooden donation box outside St. Margaret's. The latch clicked shut like it always had when the Sunday collection was full. No note. No name. Later, I deleted the last numbers that still connected us. One belonged to a man I had given life to, the other to the woman he chose instead. Both had sent messages I never replied to, short, carefully worded texts that offered olive branches shaped like obligations. Reed wants to talk. We think this has gone too far. Family doesn't block each other. But I had not blocked them out of anger. There were no insults, no threats, just silence, the kind that grows like moss over stone, soft, patient, permanent. The envelope would arrive within 3 business days, according to the postal clerk. I didn't plan to check. If it got lost, so be it. If it was opened and dismissed, so be it. It wasn't a cry for reconciliation. It was acknowledgement of everything, of nothing. I remembered a phrase my mother once muttered while folding laundry. Some goodbyes don't make noise. I had been 10 watching her sort towels into neat stacks. She never said who she was talking about. Maybe no one. Maybe everyone. On the page I'd sent, I wrote, I have lived the part of motherhood you chose not to see. I need nothing more. Frances Dalton. Nothing else. No list of hurts. No explanations. No dates to defend my memory. It wasn't a case to be argued. Just a truth to be placed quietly, where it could no longer be returned. I had learned that not everything unbroken is whole. In my small apartment, I placed the kettle on and sat beside the narrow window. The sun had just begun to lower itself into the sky's shoulder. It cast a thin line of gold across the laminate counter. I traced the line with my thumb and thought of how Reed once asked if I ever felt small in my own story. He hadn't meant it kindly. I think I do now, but not in the way he meant. I felt small the way a stone feels small in the river. Present, heavy, settled. At the library, I rearranged the children's corner for the summer readers. A young girl with a gap-toothed smile handed me a drawing last week's stick figures and too many hearts. She had written Ms. F in purple crayon across the top. I didn't correct her. I liked that she didn't need to know more. I also liked that she asked, "Do you live alone?" and then followed it with, "That must be really quiet and nice." It was. When I signed my renewal lease, I wrote Frances Calderon for the first time in decades. My mother's name restored. I didn't flinch. The pen didn't hesitate. The landlord didn't ask. That same evening, I opened the small jewelry box where I kept the gold ring from my wedding. I didn't wear it anymore. I hadn't for some time. But I hadn't thrown it out either. I ran my finger along the inside over the faint engraving. Always a word that had stretched too far and snapped. I placed it beside the library card with my new name and closed the lid. Later, while folding laundry, I found a pair of old socks Reed had left years ago after helping me move a bookshelf. I almost laughed. One had a hole at the heel. I held them in my lap for a moment. Then I tossed them into the donation pile. Not out of malice, just because I didn't need to keep everything that proved he had been here once. The past had already spoken. What remained now was space. Clean and undecorated. I poured myself a cup of tea. No sugar, no honey, just the warmth. I looked at the sealed envelope receipt still tucked under a magnet on the fridge. I didn't plan to move it. Some things are better left as quiet proof that I once spoke, even if no one listens. Some things soften when left alone long enough. The kettle clicked before the sun fully reached the floorboards. I hadn't set an alarm. My body moved by a rhythm now uncoupled from obligation. The windows were already cracked open. Mint and damp wood lingered faintly in the air. A new kind of quiet had settled into the space, one that didn't demand interpretation. I took the green cup from the shelf. It was the one with the worn ivy design along the rim and the hairline fracture just beneath the handle. I touched the crack lightly with my thumb before setting it on the counter. The tea bag unfolded like muscle memory. Peppermint always. A scent that stayed honest. On the counter beside the stove, I had left a folded receipt from the market. I had underlined ginger and sea salt, circled olive oil, a note to myself. Stop forgetting small joys. My handwriting used to be tighter clenched. Now it wandered slightly, but legibly, as if it had begun breathing. There was a time when I'd rush through mornings checking notifications, confirming school pickups, reading group emails. The space I lived in then was full of reminders about what I was not doing well enough. This kitchen, though small and square, asked for nothing. The faucet had a slow drip, and the right back burner clicked once before lighting. I never had either fixed. The stack of children's books waited patiently on the table titles with glittered covers and crooked spines. I sorted them by theme: kindness, curiosity, courage. One about a whale who wanted to live in a tree. Another about a girl who collected shadows in jars. I liked that one most. There was something in it about saving things others didn't notice. On the chair near the window, my jacket hung with a faded tag, still stitched into the collar. I had sewn it back in myself after it came loose in the laundry. That small act had felt disproportionate in meaning, like mending something that only I would care to keep. I touched the latch on the wooden box that sat above the cabinets. Still locked. Still quiet. Inside was the birthday card and the cookie. I knew every detail of the handwriting. I had once memorized the pressure of the pen, the places where it paused. Now it was just ink. I had thought once I might return it. Leave it on their doorstep, say nothing. But that would imply I still needed them to read it. Instead, it stayed. Neither forgiven nor fed, just filed. Last Tuesday, I helped a girl in the apartment downstairs apply for a housing voucher. She had knocked with a fistful of papers and a toddler on her hip. "You look like someone who knows how to make sense of this." I did. I reviewed every line twice. She brought me a jar of soup after. Too salty, but warm. "Why are you always alone?" the toddler asked me once from the hallway. I smiled. "I'm not." At the library, the children had started calling me Miss Francis. One tried teacher another, whispered fairy behind his hand. I didn't correct them. They were not looking for definition, only someone who returned each week and read the pages with care. Last weekend, during the morning hour before the library opened, Reed appeared. I saw him through the tall windows, pacing slowly by the sidewalk planters. He checked his phone, looked up, then back down again. He didn't come inside. His hands were bare. No gift, no book. Just the stillness of someone unsure what they'd hoped to find. I didn't move. I kept shelving the returned copies of Winnie the Pooh and the Paper Bag Princess. A little girl ran past him without a glance. He turned and walked away before the automatic doors even opened. No one mentioned him. At home that night, I tucked the small dish towel deeper into the drawer, the one I used to press into my lap during family dinners. It still smelled faintly of rosemary. I didn't want to throw it out only to place it somewhere less immediate. I had changed my signature on every document since January. Francis Calderon. I practiced it on scraps of paper before I wrote it on anything that mattered. Not a new name, just a returned one. At church, I joined a free meditation circle on Wednesday evenings. The first session, the instructor told us silence is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of demand. I had written that down in the margin of my library notebook. Today, I poured the tea and carried it to the balcony. The sun had risen to just kiss the railings. Across the street, someone was hanging wind chimes shaped like moons. A cat darted between two trash bins. In the courtyard below, chalk drawings began to emerge from the previous afternoon's play. Swirls suns a heart with an arrow through it. A voice echoed from beneath the stairs. "Miss Francis, are you coming to story time?" It was Clara, the girl from 2 floors down. She had a ribbon tied to her backpack and sneakers that blinked when she ran. Her hair was in uneven pigtails and her right sock didn't match. I raised my cup in reply. She grinned and bounced away, arms swinging. I lingered with the tea in my hand. The rim of the cup was chipped slightly now. I still used it. Oh, I once thought healing would look like something loud, a confrontation, an apology, a clean line drawn. But it looks more like this refilling your grocery list, answering a child's question with your full attention, choosing not to open an old box, not forgetting, just not needing to remember on demand. The chapter in my book read, "Mornings are not proof of survival. They are proof of return." I closed the book and held the warmth of the cup a little longer. And in that stillness, I was not waiting for anything.